Hello everybody, my name is Dave Jackson and welcome to another Tales from the Backlog Deep Dive, where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. Today's game is South of Midnight, which is an action-adventure game developed by Compulsion Games and published by Xbox Game Studios for PC and Xbox Series in 2025. Before we get into it, a few quick things. If this is your first time here, first of all, thank you for stopping by. Here is the spoiler policy. We are not going to spoil the story of South of Midnight for a while. We'll kind of set up the story. We'll give some top-level themes to be on the lookout for, stuff like that. And then there is a clearly marked spoiler break in the episode. After that point, we'll go into full spoilers. So we'll warn you when it's coming. There's also a timestamp down in the show notes. And if you like the show, please consider supporting on Patreon. Patreon.com/RealDaveJackson is the place. You can also tell a friend, leave a review, like and comment on YouTube, all of that jazz. Very helpful for the show that we're doing here. But I'm not here alone to talk about South of Midnight today. I am joined by a first-time guest, a friend of the show, writer, podcaster, editor-in-chief, and co-founder of But Why Though, and Southern folklore and cryptid enthusiast. Welcome to the show, Kate Sánchez.
Hi, I love that you included that last bit because it's one of my favorite parts about me.
Always do, yeah. We'll get into it, but you did a nice kind of write-up and collection of the folklore and cryptids and things that this game is drawing from on But Why Though, so I had to throw that in there for you. But it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me for this.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. I said it before we started recording, but this is my first time talking about this game, and I'm very excited. This game means so much to me.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's get into it then. Quick pitches. If anyone clicked on this and they don't know what South of Midnight is, you're my hero if you're here and you don't know what this game is at all. But quick pitch time. I say South of Midnight is Southern folklore come to life in beautiful stop motion. Kate, what would you say?
I would say if you are a fan of Maniac McGee, Big Fish, or Eve's Bayou, this thing's for you because it's all three pulled into one.
Perfect. Love that. I'm going to revisit one of those when we get into why I wanted to start playing this game in the first place. Quick stats. I played this on PC. It took me 10 hours to get through the game. How about you?
I played it on Xbox Series X. It took me about 9 hours to get through the game on normal, and then I did another run that took me about 10 hours on hard, or the Master Weaver piece. Yeah.
Right on. Okay, cool. Some quick credits for the top here, and we'll have more credits as we go through the game. The game director is Jasmine Roy, and the creative director is David Sears. And some of those names will come back up again as we get into it. We'll have more credits, like I said. But time to get into South of Midnight proper, and we always start by talking about why we wanted to play the game in the first place. So the guest always goes first, and Kate, I remember when I first messaged you about you coming on the podcast, I gave you a list of games and you immediately picked out South of Midnight. So what was it about this game that really drew you in?
So I think for me is as I've gotten older and I've been in a space that very much skews towards the coasts of people being located on the east or west coast of the United States, I've noticed so much more how maligned the South is. And with some of it is for good reason, without getting into politics. I understand. I live it every day. But there's also a beauty and depth to this region of the country that we don't get to see portrayed in media this way, that we don't get to play. And I think when I saw that the initial trailer at last year's Xbox showcase, I was floored because it was the first time I was really going to get to explore this piece of life that I know is so rich with story and beauty, and I knew that other people were going to get to do that. And that's exciting for me because I think as I've been cultivating my space and my voice, my voice in this space, there are like kind of three things central to that. One, I'm Latina. Two, I'm from the South. And three, I'm a woman. And all of those kind of have really shaped how I build out the space for me and anybody behind me. And I think this game has given a language for a lot of people to latch onto and finally understand what Southern folks have been saying a lot about the place that we come from.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And that was part of the draw for me too. I think that the art style, like the stop motion and stuff, kind of like made people take note of the trailer. But then once you started to see what the trailer showed you about what the game was actually about, that drew me in too, because one of the things that I love about video games, and often indie games, but sometimes the bigger games too, is showing those kind of underrepresented cultures. Like you said, we have so many video games that are like, if they're set in a real place, it's like East Coast, West Coast, Japan, Western Europe, very
Yep.
well represented in video games. And I did a whole episode on the show where we just kind of like tossed out games that are not set in those settings and kind of talked about the value of those. And we skipped the entire US from that. But it got me thinking, like, the South is not represented really either. I started to think, like, what games do I know of that are set in the South and like very identifiably the South? And I was like, I couldn't come up with anything except for Resident Evil 7, which is not a great great representation,
Yeah. The only one I can really think of is maybe Mafia 3.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't played that.
Because
But
I believe it's in New Orleans.
okay.
So, but that's like the only one. Like, I
Right.
can't think of others.
Yeah, it was like Red Dead Redemption 2 had some like Southern inspired cities, but it wasn't like about that
Truly
really.
the South. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I guess maybe the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game.
True.
I guess.
Technically, yes. Yeah. And kind of like you mentioned in your pitch there, what you saw in the trailer, I think they showed the catfish and kind of like that folklore come to life. And that reminded me of Big Fish, which is one of my favorite movies ever. I just love that movie so much. It's like, that's like my plane movie. If I'm on a plane and I see it on there, I'll just watch it and it'll help me pass the time. I just love it a lot. And this really reminded me of that kind of like tall tales brought to life, stuff like that. So I was really interested in this. It was one that I was looking forward to playing on day one. And top level thoughts here before we dig in proper. I was completely blown away by this game. Everything that was promised absolutely blew me away. A couple things that I didn't get a good sense of in the trailer, like the soundtrack, was incredible too. And then we'll talk later. I have criticisms about the gameplay, specifically the combat in it.
Same.
And like, we all kind of like play this and we're like, that's not why we're playing this, because we're looking for a great combat system. I do think it behooves us to talk about it, but everything that is like the draw and the reason anyone wants to play South of Midnight, I think is like an absolute home run. I really, really like this.
No, I completely agree. I think that when I was excited by its existence, I know the community manager over there. She's from the South and she's a fantastic human being. So I knew the community was going to be in good hands, but I also knew it was a Canadian studio, which needs to be said.
Yeah.
And I was apprehensive because I didn't know if it was just going to be Tim Burton's take on the South, which Big Fish is phenomenal, yes. But like, you have somebody from the outside looking in, what are the nuances that are going to be embraced? Are they going to be embraced? Are there going to be small things that only Southern folks are going to see and like clock it? And I think that for me, I think it was one of the first dev videos that they did that one of the head devs, I forget who it was, but actually like lived in Mississippi for a time and was like, no, like, I want to bring this culture to life. And I think what they executed very well were all like, it's exactly what you said, like the story, the art design, the environmental design, and I think very specifically nailing what Southern Gothic literature means. And I think that was key for me, because it's not easy to do Southern Gothic because it can devolve very quickly into shock horror. Or it can lose the southernness of it and immediately just get pulled into like Bronte's Gothic style. It's a very fine line, and I think that they're able to execute it in a way that I think is hopefully opening up the world to people in the same way that Sinners is doing, just not in film but in games.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit of nice synergy for those two things to come out really close to one another. And it's allowed people to kind of be like, oh, you liked South of Midnight. Oh, you liked Sinners. Here's some other stuff that you'll probably like. And opening those doors is really good. So sometimes all it takes is a gateway. And I count myself in people like that who don't have a lot of experience with media, dealing with this specific culture and setting and stuff like that. So it's good. And you mentioned, I had this later, but we can bring it up now. You mentioned that it's a Canadian studio, and some of the creatives on the team, I think it's the creative director, they did a like half-hour little documentary making of thing. Where like the creative director, some of the other team members were from the South. They brought in consultants also, specifically like a folklore consultant named Donna Washington, to make sure that obviously you take creative liberties and stuff, but to make sure you get the spirit of it. And then other consultants too, because you have mostly Black characters in this game, and other consultants like Sweet Baby to come in and make sure you're doing your characters justice and doing the cultures justice. So people may see, like you said, you see the Canadian studios making a game about the South. I don't know. I don't think that you should be scared off by seeing that.
Yes, entirely. And I think that like this game for me has really become, I'm not a person who believes that you have to be of a culture specifically to tell that story, because I think it's about intent. And that's how we start opening the door for a lot more people to come in, for new talents to come in, because that pathway has to get tread. And ultimately in industries like games, where it is already people with that clout and that proven ability, and I say proven ability in quotations, not that they don't have it, but that they've been given the opportunity for it. So sometimes you have to be able to make that swing to open the door to the consultants like that, to open the door to build your team with new developers who have those experiences. And I think that South of Midnight is a really good example of what can be done when you just look to go outside the box, when you point to an area that has not been covered and go, you know what, we're going to do that. And we're going to be open to learn, and we're going to bring out the best that we can from it. And I think that that's what storytelling is about, regardless of the medium that you're in.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to say it. To be like, to recognize, we want to talk about this. And like you said, you don't have to have grown up down there to tell a story that's set down there. But it doesn't hurt to be open-minded, to make sure that you do things justice and do things right. And so I feel like they definitely did. I mean, it's a guy who grew up in Ohio and has lived here for most of my life. I don't have a great perspective on what it's like to live in the South. So I'm glad that you're here as we go through the rest of the stuff here. So let's take a music break. We will introduce people again to the music in South of Midnight. And when we come back, we will set up the story. South of Midnight takes place in a non-specific Deep South town. It's called Prospero. They took lots of different influences, different areas of the South, and kind of combined them all into Prospero. And then the different locations that you go, there's swamps, there's farmland, there's a place that's pretty obviously inspired by New Orleans and stuff like that. But it's a non-specific place. Gothic fantasy, which means we're dealing with the real world. We're dealing with real problems, real people, real issues that they have. But there's magic, there's fantasy, and this is a game where like folklore comes to life. And again, that was something that I thought was really interesting. And like I said at the top, you wrote a nice kind of like breakdown of, here's the folklore that South of Midnight is pulling from. Here's like kind of the real inspiration behind it. So in your opinion, do you think that they did the creative, the folklore stuff well?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I do want to say it's nondescript, but it is actually very specific with where they said it.
Okay.
So when in the introduction, they call out Chickasaw County. That is a county in Mississippi, a Gulf state. They highlight elements of Georgia, also Gulf. Same thing with the Alabama representation, all areas around the southern Gulf Coast.
Right. And
So
then New
that's one of
Orleans
the
too.
things.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. That's one of the things I want to say. It is very it's nondescript, but
But
it's
Gulf.
very,
Yeah.
very specific, which I
Okay.
think was one of the interesting things that they did. Because if you know those places, your brain is immediately like, oh yeah, it's not so much let's take this and make it like pan south as much as it's, at least for me, it felt like Hazel was moving through the different spaces. But
Hmm.
yeah, sorry, that's neither here nor there. That was
No,
just
it's
like a
good.
little, ooh, I want to highlight Chickasaw County because Mississippi does not get as much love as it should as a place of
True.
wonder. But for the folklore, I think they did a phenomenal job with it. And there are elements of it that are entirely not what we see in representation. So I think one of the best examples of this is I don't know if that's a spoiler, so I won't get into it. But there are very significant ways in which they change the physical manifestations of the folk tales, tall tales, and myths, as well as cryptids that they're representing.
Yeah.
That action, one of them actually is represented by something the name doesn't even represent,
Hmm.
which is very funny. But I never once, even with those liberties, thought it felt out of place because just like what you said about hiring the consultants to find the essence and the heart of what this story means, that's what they were able to do every time they represented something. And I
Hmm.
think that in the South, Southern storytelling, I love that you call that why you like Big Fish, the idea of telling tales bigger and bigger and bigger. That is just how stories get told down here.
Yeah.
I think like if you look into the really long history of Southern laureates, you end up seeing it is always taking something small and it winds out into something really huge. And they're able to do that with the progression of the folk tales that they tell because it starts very, how do I say it? Very intimate and small, and each
Hmm.
one grows larger and larger as Hazel goes deeper into this story. And
Hmm.
I think being able to map that into what is being done and the stories that they're telling and connecting them all, that's a hard task. Like, I'm not jealous of their narrative director or any of the folks on that writing team. Yeah, especially because, like, it's like with any culture, like genuinely folklore has such a specific place. Like I have heard people fight about pronunciations of like Rougarou and which one's correct and whether
Mm.
it's the Cajun or the Creole one that they're going to run with and which one is scarier or better. And I think that it's really cool to go so beyond it that you wind up not finding yourself in that fight. I don't know if any of that made sense.
No, no, totally. Like, I think that's one of the cool things about folklore and tall tales is like there isn't like a specific truth that you're going to get mad at if it's not exactly like that,
Yeah.
because especially if this folklore is shared across multiple areas, it's just going to be different depending on who's telling the story. So this is their version in South of Midnight of these
Mhm.
tales. And there's another thing that you touched on is that using the folklore tales to kind of when you boil what those stories are about and what these monsters are in South of Midnight, they all come down to very human stories at the
Mhm.
center of them. And so what you're doing in South of Midnight is you play as Hazel Flood, who's I don't know, like young 20s, late teens ish,
Yeah. I think
like
she's going into college, right? So
something
like
like
probably
that.
18, 19,
Yeah.
maybe 20.
Right. And so at the beginning, there's a big storm that arrives, a big hurricane comes. Again, Gulf area should have clued me in, but a hurricane's coming and there's a big flood. Hazel's house with her mom inside gets washed away in the flood. And there's this great opening section. This is what like really pulled me into the game is when the flood happens and you're chasing your house as it's washed down this river. And the music is like just incredible during this section.
Yeah.
And you're chasing the house, you can't find it. So like the main plot setup is that Hazel's trying to find her mom. she gets these magic powers. She becomes something called a weaver, which is a kind of chosen healer, like a capital H healer, I suppose, that can mend tears in what they call the grand tapestry that kind of the world is made out of. And so as you go, this loops back to the folklore, because as you go, you encounter these kind of cryptids, these folklore creatures, and a weaver's job is to help, is to heal, is to mend traumas, both in the weave, which is causing problems, but also traumas that people have. Like there's in-game lore about like how when there is a weaver active, because they're not always active, crime goes down and stuff like that. And so you go through and you meet people who are having various, they have like unhealed traumatic pasts, basically. And it's Hazel's job to help them. And this is how you take this like big story of like, oh, there's a giant alligator stomping around and causing destruction and stuff. But you learn the story behind the alligator, and it boils down to like a very human story. And then you go through and it's just kind of like, as you're chasing after your mom in your house, a series of short stories and different characters that represent different kind of pasts that people could have had, different upbringings and things like that. I thought these stories were all really entertaining. Some of them were quite touching, and the monsters that kind of arise out of these stories, always entertaining. Like this was awesome.
Yeah. And I think that was like, I think this was one of the critiques some people had. I wouldn't say it was a critique. I'd say that people were maybe not prepared. So the game itself has always said it was Southern Gothic. It has led with that. It has shown that. But I think when people see fantasy like stories, they don't think it's going to get as dark as South of Midnight does.
Yeah.
But that's Southern Gothic. So Southern Gothic, if you don't know what that is and you're listening to this, it's specifically stories dealing with societal or familial decay. What that means is there are often a lot of secrets, a lot of betrayals, a lot of traumas, and it is about unpacking different desires and the ill-gotten ways people go about it to get it, and how you either rectify that. And often in Southern Gothic storytelling, especially if it's involving the supernatural, there isn't always going to be a very perfect ending. It's always going to be open. And I think that is what they're able to achieve with each of these small stories. And to go a step further, what I love about the folklore in the game is that they work it into both the mechanics and the songs. And if you're not familiar with bluegrass music, blues music, or jazz, I would say bluegrass and blues more specifically, but all of the way that these songs work is to tell a story. You could say every song tells a story, but these will literally say, I walked down to this club at midnight, I went and I talked to this woman. And it is a story through the entire piece. And what Compulsion has been able to do with their music, it's a little piece of exposition that I think works very well for people who may not have caught some of like the smaller details if they didn't stop at look at portraits, if they didn't pick up all of the pieces. And it usually plays in the last leg of that area. It's masterful. It's fantastic. And I can't really capture how well it just gets the atmosphere, but it also makes sure that people aren't losing the depth and emotion of the story, even when it hits those dark points. And from a mechanical perspective, there is something in Southern folklore called a fifolet. And fifolets are lights that pop up. I think it's specifically in like Louisiana. It may be through the wider Gulf, but the fifolets are lights that pop up and they're supposed to lead you astray. They're like mischievous spirits that come up and just pull you away. And they look like the little blue balls that you are tasked with to go get to like earn level points that pull you off the path you're supposed to go to.
Yeah, the fluffs.
And that's the fifolet.
Yeah, floofs in the game. Yeah,
exactly. And there is one specific. It's in the very first when you're with Rhubarb. There's a little paper you can click on, and if you read that, it explains what a fifolet is and maps it out for you. Yeah. I didn't think that was a spoiler because it was a core mechanic,
No, it's
but
good. No.
yeah.
No, no, I agree. The way that they basically tie all aspects into the game into like the little short story that you're doing at the time, or like, game wide mechanics could be more broad references from folklore, legend, or something like that. I think a lot of people have pointed out those songs at the end of the chapters that are kind of like relaying the events of the chapter out. I liked all of them except for the first one. I really didn't like the first one.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, didn't like it at all. It felt,
Why?
I think it was what you said, where it is not, there's no abstraction between like the very simple storytelling and the lyrics of the song. Like you
Mm.
said, they are literally telling you the story in the song. It reminded me of a Johnny Cash song that I really like called "I Hung My Head," which is a Sting cover. But it's exactly this type of thing where it's like literally, I did this, this happened, now I'm doing this, this happened, this happened. I just didn't like the version in this game, but I liked all the other ones after that. And they change up the style too. The one about like the gator and stuff is more upbeat, and
Yes.
there's one with like a kind of an old wives' tale kind of story that's very like a song that kids would sing about the evil
Hmm.
thing in their neighborhood without saying too much, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I agree
I,
with you.
I a step further, each of
Yeah,
them actually replicate the music styles that are specific to the areas in
to
the
the
game that
area.
they're bringing out. So that first one is very Appalachian in tone because it's closer to that bluegrass feel. And
Mm.
then as you go on, and I think like the Ruguru one's my favorite, and that one is more blues inspired.
Hmm.
So that's one of the really cool things. I love that you also brought up Johnny Cash because that is also, I think that's probably the best way. I'm going to assume people have not heard of like prominent blues artists, but I do think everybody knows who Johnny Cash is, and Folsom Prison is probably that's a good representation of what you can see being done when you tell a story in song.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Speaking of blues, I wanted to loop back to some examples of like folklore or legends that we see throughout here. So
mhm.
there's like the legend of the devil at the crossroads and Robert Johnson and things
Yes.
like that. There are superstitions like putting bottles on tree branches, and that's a major thing in the story here. And then you have like the monsters. You have the haints. You have the color blue, which I learned about from your article that you wrote, tying into the game here. The attention to detail in the storytelling, in building the setting, in the music, in the way everything ties together like this. Like you can almost just treat story and presentation in South of Midnight as exactly the same thing because they're all
Yeah.
building on the other parts. It's not one where you can be like, oh, well, the music is nice and pleasant, but it could come from any game. I don't feel like South of Midnight could be one of those.
Yeah, and I think that that's like I think that's why I fell so in love with it because you can tell that every single piece of this game wasn't put together on its own, but it was all made in unison
Hmm.
because they had a very clear directive. I do think like the Haints are probably my favorite piece. Actually, in my folklore piece that wrote for butwhytho.net, the longest sections are actually talking about Robert Johnson, who is an
Mm.
incredible blues artist who's theoretically sold his soul to the devil in order to become an incredible blues artist
Hmm.
and influence the genre. But also the idea of haints in general. Now, haints is something that it's the primary enemy in the game.
Yeah.
But haints throughout Southern folklore are just malevolent spirits. However, there's a very specific saying that Robert Johnson talks about, and with the myth that goes along with him, is the idea that the only way to become a good blues player is to learn from the haints at midnight in a cemetery.
Mm.
And that idea, especially when it comes to enemy clears in the game, as you learn more throughout the story, that one I think may be me reaching, but I think the Haints kind of find themselves throughout the game as well because Haint Blue is that was probably my favorite piece was taking the idea of yellow paint or white paint to show where to go in a game and making it paint blue.
Yeah.
That was where I was like, you all locked in, and you locked in on every like Southern's porch color, porch ceiling color, because haints in mythology cannot cross water. And so to protect your home, you paint your porch ceiling blue.
Mm.
Um, and so the compulsion marks your path that you go down with blue.
Yeah.
And it's such a thoughtful thing that I don't know if many people cared about, but it stood out to me so largely in a way that like this entire world is it's done with care. And
Hmm.
I think that I wanted a game just like this. I
Yeah.
didn't know that I could get one, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
That's a good way to put it, for sure. You see the promise of a new game coming up, and you always hope that it's going to be exactly what you want it to be. And a lot of times it's not. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we get cool stuff like this. So that's awesome. Awesome to hear. Let's see other story stuff. I wanted to again shout out part of like the story and some of the kind of short stories that you play through. All kind of stem from the fact that this feels like a very black story,
Mhm.
focusing on it's not only about black people in the South, it's about the community down there. But because Hazel's black and a lot of the characters that you interact with and go through their stories, a lot of them are also black. By nature, the story does kind of tend in that direction. One of the kind of things that you're following in here is Hazel's following the ghost of the last Weaver, which was a long time ago. The last Weaver is like an underground railroad helper. So you're kind of learning about that past, and it's not like I didn't know. It's not like people playing this are not going to know about the history of slavery in the South, but like you go down to like some other levels here too, where it's not all about slavery. Sometimes it's about people working in a sawmill and the way that they're
Mhm.
mistreated by their bosses. There is a pleasure boat storyline in here that like that's an aspect where it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe could have guessed that stuff like that happened, but like to see it all laid out in story form and done really well, in my opinion, these are really great, and they tie into, I think, like you said, as part of like the Gothic fantasy setting, they tie into like very local
Yeah.
personal stories all the time. As big as the game may get, it always comes down to like a very small thing between two, sometimes three people. Again, it's one of those things like Canadian studio, get help to make sure that this stuff is in here in a sensitive and respectful way. Not that I
Yeah.
didn't think they would be respectful, but like
Yeah.
you hear and you're like, oh, they're going there, and then they go there. And what you said earlier about this game being pretty dark, a lot of these stories are quite dark stories, which you see the catfish, and he reminds me of the father from Big Fish, and you see all the big colorful monsters and stuff. You're like, oh, fantasy! Look at the beautiful landscapes and stuff. But these stories are heavy. Most of them are very heavy. They deal with a lot of really heavy subjects. There's multiple child deaths in the story. Like there's a lot going on in here. And again, you can see the effort that went into making these entertaining, but also like thoughtfully done, affecting, everything like that. Like it's just so well done.
And I think that that's one of the most important things. I think whenever anybody is approaching a new culture in general, I think one of the important things to understand, and I think what compulsion understands, is that while these stories are very central on a core experience, and here it's a Black Southern experience, they are also universal in the feelings that they invoke,
Yeah.
the grief and the pain and the trauma and the ability to connect across that. And I think that that's one of the things, what people don't understand about the southern part of the United States is the southern part of the United States has both the most Latinos anywhere in the country and the most Black people of anywhere in the United States. So
Mm,
while it often gets told that it is just, the white Republican haven, that's not actually the reality that we live every day. That is not the reality of Mobile, Alabama. That is not the reality of Mississippi. That's not the reality of Georgia and every other state. And what I love that this game does is it really highlights the large importance that not just Black culture, but very specifically a lot of these folklores are rooted in Yoruba, in Haitian, in
hmm
and West African traditions that were carried over and then married with something, like the Rougarou is a perfect example. It is French in origin, when it comes to name. It is also very much driven by West African ideas, and that's how you end up with something that is Creole. And I think that what South of Midnight does with these stories is it gives you a person to see and hold on to, and then it gives you a feeling to carry throughout them. And that is a cross cultural story method that so many storytellers that are revered have done. It's something that Toni Morrison has done. It's something that Octavia Butler has done. It is, and I think that that's what this is able to do. I think more specifically as well is, especially Americans, we've been taught to look for something to be extremely overt, right? Like if
mm,
you want, like we were expecting a war movie to tell us about the Civil War. We're expecting a biopic like Harriet to tell us about the Underground Railroad.
mm,
And what we're not taught to see is what people see in the South every day are the small ways in which these cultural nuances that are specific to this area represent a history that is larger than ourselves. And even the very act of weaving in and of itself is very specific to the idea that on the Underground Railroad, safe houses would lay out quilts, and the quilts patterns would denote whether or not people were in the area, who was coming, if it was safe, if they had room. And that was a messaging system. And you see this throughout the game. And even beyond that, too, weaving even outside of Black culture is also very important to Appalachian culture. And then
mm,
if you go even from the past and pull it up, selling quilts was one of the first ways that Black women in Alabama were able to actually make money for themselves. And so you have this long history of weaving, and quilt work that holds this story together, but historically also holds such a prominent place, that I think is able to really beautifully pull people together and want to learn more, right?
hmm
Like I think that that's good storytelling, is you give people a little bit and you tell something. And I think that pleasure boat storyline is probably one of the most overt in what is happening
hmm
and beautiful and painful all the same. But it tells people, you grip people to want to go and seek something out, right?
hmm
And I've been really happy because seeing the back end of the site, my folklore article has been like trending since the game came out.
mm,
And that makes me happy because that means that people played that game and want to know what it means. They
yeah.
want to know who these people are. They want to know what this culture is. And that's how you build understanding. And that's how you build connection between people who may have never been down here and may have never seen what it's like.
Yeah, very well said. And that article was an instant click from me when I saw that because of exactly what you said. It was like I've been playing it, and I was like, yes, I do want to learn more, and I could wait until I'm in a Wikipedia dive kind of mood, or I could just read this right now. So it was great timing for sure. I'll make sure to link that article down in the show description for everyone to check out. Um, I wanted to get your take on one thing that kind of stuck out to me in a kind of bad way for a little while. And then I got to thinking and like maybe rationalized it to myself. But you mentioned weaving as like a specifically chosen verb and a weaver noun for like your main kind of like role in the story as a weaver of the grand tapestry, and how weaving relates to Southern culture in lots of different ways. Other kind of like big words in the story, such as bottles, trauma, or not traumas, stigmas, things like that. Some of those stuck out to me as very on the nose word choices. You know, the way Hazel mends things in the weave is she captures pain in bottles, she bottles the pain up, and then that kind of like weave that the pain forms can then heal the traumas in the greater weave. There's too many weaves going on in my sentence right now. Those can heal what are called stigmas, which are these disruptions in the weave that these haints, these monsters can come out of, and things like that. Those felt a little on the nose to me. In saying that, I kind of understand why stigma is a word that maybe they wanted to get in the game, because the South has many stigmas about it. And, you know, it's a neat way, you know, we bottle the pain, literally in the game, stuff like that. But it also kind of felt to me like since we're telling tall tales, a lot of, you know, idioms and things like that, we'll have a little tall tale about why we use this turn of phrase. Why do we say bottle the pain? Why do we say et cetera, et cetera? It kind of related in that way. I don't know if that stuck out to you. That was like my one thing about the story that didn't hit really well for me.
Yeah. I think it hit well for me, but it's because I know what bottle trees do.
Right.
So you put bottle trees in your garden to catch evil spirits.
Right.
So it
So
was
it's
a
used in a little
1-to-1 to
different
me.
way.
Yeah, a different way, yes. But also when you look at the people that, or the monsters that Hazel is taking the pain from, she is taking their evil from them. She is taking the trauma that has morphed them in a way that has become dangerous or rotted in them. I think is probably one of the best words that I used a lot, because that also goes back to that Southern Gothic piece, which is that like these very large traumatic experiences rot in us, and they come out in different ways. And so for me, that hit. I think stigma, I understood it. That was probably the only one for me where I was like, I don't know if it fits perfectly. But bottles, that worked, but that was only because I've hung a bottle on a bottle tree before. It's supposed to catch all the bad stuff from coming in your house. Very similar to a Haint Blue Ceiling. So that felt normal. But the stigma one, I think that always felt a little forced and maybe a little bit out of place with what we were doing in that case, because I don't think that narratively, I don't think that every encounter that she's pulling this trauma from had a stigma attached to it. And I
Yeah.
think that that's where there's a disconnect in word and action.
Yeah. I think it was all like within the same maybe half hour of playing the game, we're introduced to all of these, you know,
Yeah.
terms. And so I was like, wow, calling this one stigma, huh? Okay. But I see what you're saying there. I think the last thing I wanted to point out for the story, and it's, I guess, funny I didn't say this first or early on, but I think this game is paced really, really well. Not a given for a 9 or 10 hour game for everything to always feel like it has momentum, but this game definitely did. The story definitely did. The gameplay, I mean, like, I think that the pacing of what you're doing as far as playing the game is fine too, but I always finished one story thing, got shunted into the next area, and was really curious about what the story was going to be in that area. And then those stories play out really smoothly, we'll say. So, very well paced game. And for video games, I feel like it's something I should shout out when it happens.
I completely agree. I think it's extremely well paced. I also think that I see this as an adult with a full-time job. Even when I was playing this for review, I was able to actually give it the time that it needed.
Mm.
which I think is important because the way that it's paced and also the pacing mechanism, which is the transitional moments between chapters where Catfish or Hazel is narrating what happened and introducing you to where you're going, which I think is really good because I think what that does is it allows people to step away and come back in a very effective way that I don't know if a lot of games do so well. And I think the ability to both build your pace and let each progressive chapter build on the last in a smooth way, but also give your player points to kind of, okay, got to put this down, got to leave, is smart,
Hmm.
not only from a time management sense, but I also think when you are dealing with stories that are this heavy, some of them may hit closer than others, and somebody may need to get up and walk one of them off,
Yeah.
and I think that that's smartly done as well.
Yeah, it was a really easy game for me to play a couple chapters at a time or one chapter
Yeah.
at a time. And, I didn't finish any of these chapters being like, I need to take a walk. But, I always came out of it being like, I would like this opportunity to take a break and think about what this story was about and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So, good stuff there. Anything else about the story that you wanted to touch on before we save the rest of it for spoiler time?
No, I'm
All
ready to
right.
dive into spoilers.
Fair enough. Well, we have some more stuff before spoilers, so we're going to listen to a bit of music when we come back. We'll talk more about the presentation in South of Midnight. So let's start with the visuals. As far as presentation goes in South of Midnight, the principal art credit is to Whitney Clayton, and I feel like this is a game where I want to get names out there for work that they led, because this is the thing that I think first got people's attention during the trailers is the way the game looks. The stop motion animation, the designs of the characters. There's a very, very stylized effect to character designs, to the monsters, even to the environments. There's a kind of magical feel to the environments that you're in. So this was like the promise, and this was something that I think put some people off, was that stop motion. Not sure they want to play an entire game in that. I played with the stop motion effect on. You can turn it off if you want to. I didn't think that this was distracting in the slightest when I was playing. Like, it didn't feel choppy or anything like that. It felt very smooth. And then you notice the stop motion in cutscenes mostly. That was my experience.
Yeah. I had to turn it off.
Okay.
It triggered my motion sickness very
Mm.
violently. So that's the issue, for me at least. And I know that at least from some of the responses we got from our community on our review, just like asking if they could play it from an accessibility standpoint,
Hmm.
it that and then the fixed camera angle actually, the initial fixing of the camera, it you can turn it off or on. I had it off the entire time.
Hmm.
I tried to play with the stop motion on. Um, I noticed it actually most significantly in combat sequences, and that's
Okay.
when I would get really sick. Um, so I turned it off after about like two-ish chapters because I just could not sit through it anymore. And then it was really smooth throughout. And what I like about it is I think that the ability to understand that your artistic choice may actually have negative consequences for a player, and giving them the ability to turn it off it's difficult in that you have to relinquish some of your control as a developer,
Hmm.
but it does you also have to relinquish some of your artistic vision. And so I think the fact that they were able to let the artistry come across both with it on and off was really fantastic for me because I would not have been able to play the game otherwise. Like I had to, when I did the preview, I actually had to email the reps to be like, I actually cannot play this right now because it is making me sick. Is what can I do? I see that there's no like there wasn't sensitivity for movement at the time, and I thought that was it, and they very lovingly directed me towards the accessibility. The It wasn't in the accessibility menu, it was in the visuals menu where you could
Okay.
turn it off and do that, and then I was like, "Oh, this is great." Then I tried it again when it released because I was like, "Well, then let's see if it's been refined." So I'm not of two minds. I think it was a very bold choice for them to do it. I think it is absolutely stunning and showcases the beauty of animation,
Yeah.
which I talk a lot about as a film critic. But I am also happy that they tested for accessibility because I would not have been able to play it otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. It is it's always good when developers kind of give you the option to take stuff like that. A lot of times we talk about this with like color blindness or gameplay
Yes.
stuff, especially difficulty and stuff like that. But when doing such a stylized thing like stop motion, I'm glad that they figured out that it was going to cause issues for people and they were okay with, like you said, relinquishing some of that control. Because, you know, it was in my quick pitch at the top, and I think it's a thing people notice in the trailers. But I think the stop motion itself doesn't, not to say that doesn't add anything, but the lack of stop motion would not make this game any less beautiful, I don't feel like.
Yeah. That's such a that is such a thin needle like that is like the thinnest of needle openings to thread through
Hmm.
that I'm genuinely astonished that they were able to pull it off.
Yeah,
Um
well done by them. Was there anything else about the kind of visual aspect of the game that you wanted to shout out?
I mean really it's just the attention to color palettes. I think that the environmental designs of the game specifically are so gorgeous
Yeah.
and so thoughtfully made. I think that there's also little elements throughout that they're flowers that you know are specific to certain locations.
Hmm.
There are architecture styles that are very specific to certain regions in the South. And I think that when you look at it as a whole, like it is one of those like tip to tail, like this game is embodying what it wants to be.
Yeah.
And
They
I
didn't
think
skip any steps.
artistically, they didn't. And I've tried to find like critiques in it and stuff. And like the thing is like I walk there's a section where you're walking up to a very large house and there
Hmm.
are the willows that are on the sides of the road
Hmm.
and it's gorgeous and it,
Yeah.
it it looks like it I've been to places like that, right? And yeah, so it was, on the art level I think the environmental designers did an amazing job, an
Yeah.
absolutely amazing job.
Yeah, it's one of the most screenshotable games I've played in a
Yes.
very long time. Like every time you turn a corner, you're like, holy shit, look at that.
Yeah.
So really good.
And they're also drastically different. Like I
Yeah.
think that's actually what blew me away is that you have like you're in a cave at one point with a very fantastical setting. You're in a trailer park at another. You're in a I forget the name for them, but you're like in like water, like houses on stilts in another.
Yeah,
You're in a
right.
mansion in another. You're in a world that doesn't really exist but is pulling in New Orleans
Yeah.
vibes
Yep.
in another. And there's so like I think that when we play games as players, we move through these levels and we can appreciate how beautiful they are. But I don't know if we stop and appreciate how cohesive they are as well. And I
Hmm.
think to embody so many different places and atmospheres and still make it feel like one continuous story, that's really good
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
the strength of art direction and like having
Yeah.
a very clear idea of the art direction that you want to go in, where you can take all these very different locations, but they all fit within your style
Yeah.
really, really well. I just wanted to shout out real quick. This game has amazing signs. As started paying attention to signs more often in games within the last couple years, and they had a lot of fun making the signs. I'll just say that. And the posters, when you're in interior spaces, the posters are great.
Really
There's some
cool.
like references to real world musicians. I can't remember exactly who it was, but
Meg the Stallion.
there we go. That's the one. Yeah, I saw that and I was like, yeah, they're right. So those are cool.
Fun fact too, the college that her mom went to, I think it's a take on Spelman, but it's a reference to Spelman College as well. So a renowned historically Black college specifically for Black women. So I thought that like those little small details are so good.
Yeah, really good. And the other thing I wanted to say is this is yet another game in the camp of interior clutter is good, actually, in my opinion,
Yes!
in video games. A lot of gamers complain about clutter. I don't understand at all. I couldn't imagine walking into a house in South of Midnight and being like, I wish there was less stuff in here, because it's like, it's incredible. You go in a lot of houses, some for story purposes, but a lot just because it's like part of the level to walk through a house. And the stuff in there really tells the story of the people who lived there. And without that, you would lose it. And the only time I would accept like an anti-clutter argument is if it distracts you from how to proceed in the game. Like if it's a visual clarity issue, and it's not in this game, and it's not in the other games I've heard these complaints about either, in my opinion. I love it. I love walking into a house and being like, look at there's pots on the stove, and there's posters on the walls, and there's books, and there's kids' toys and everything. And it's like, you get a sense of the people who lived in the house. They're not anonymous buildings that you're walking through.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. The spaces become characters themselves, and I think that's just as important.
Yep. Okay. The other part of presentation, we already talked about this a little bit, but I didn't get a chance to credit the person who did the soundtrack. And I have never said their name out loud before, so bear with me. Olivier Derivier. Hopefully that's 30% correct. I saw this name and I was like, I don't know who that is. That's interesting. I looked up their credits. They did the Plague Tale soundtracks, which are good soundtracks. They did Vampire/Vampire, however you say that game, which had a great soundtrack. Remember Me and Streets of Rage 4. Those are big credits on there.
Yeah.
And of the games I've played on that list, good soundtracks, South of Midnight soundtrack blew me away. And I wanted to revisit just how fucking good this soundtrack is.
Yes, it's so good. It's so
it's
good.
Amazing.
It's so good.
There's a lot to it, like the diversity in the sounds. It's like, this is a point I wanted to say earlier. I lost it at some point, but like we say the South, capital T, capital S, the South. But the South is not a monolith of culture. There's a ton of cultures in the South, and there's a ton of styles of music that you may associate with the South. And this game hits on so many of them. So jazz, big band stuff. There's folk songs, bluegrass, like you said. There's Southern rock. There's gospel. There's blues. There's a lot. It all sounds really good, and it all fits in the sections that they choose to use them in. And this is like, it's crazy to me. This was the thing that like the trailer didn't give me an idea I would be in for this kind of musical experience in here. But like I said, with that flood introduction where you have like the big band playing while the flood is going. And then from then on, I was like, okay, the music's going to be special. And it is. It's so good.
Did you ever fall while doing one of the final platforming things?
Ooh, maybe. Maybe. I don't remember.
I could be crazy. And if a compulsion developer is listening to this, let me know if I'm crazy or not. But I fell. Benji's, I think, was the first time I noticed it. I fell, and in a couple of other places, I wandered a little bit when I like clued in that it was happening. It is a skill to take a hyper specific song with lyrics and be able to disengage from it so that it matches the path that your player is going on.
Ooh, yeah. True.
Because it loops in a way that you don't notice that it's looping. And it blends into the environmental music if you find yourself pulled slightly, and then it comes back in, and it's seamless.
That's
That was what blew me away, because it wasn't
yeah.
just the pacing of the game, it was the ability to pace music with the energy that the player was bringing to the specific action.
Hmm.
And I think that this is, if you didn't notice that, you probably noticed when you're doing the really quick platforming pieces at the very, very end of each level,
Yeah.
that frantic jazz that is playing.
Yeah.
God, it just it hits where you're going, and each platform feels like you're matching the rhythm of what's being played behind you.
Hmm.
It's masterful, like
It is.
genuinely.
Yeah, putting it all out like that should give us an idea of like it's probably a logistical nightmare to try and get this all to match up like that. And it's so well done that I didn't notice anything that you just said while I was playing, even though I definitely fell during some of those sections. I didn't notice it because it was just so it was like, oh, maybe they're taking a break during this. We have a bridge or something like that. So, yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say specifically about the music other than I was thoroughly entertained by the music throughout, and I thought it matched really, really well. And just wanted to revisit it to just be like, come back, hit everybody again with how good the soundtrack in South of Midnight
Yeah.
is. I find it
Also,
hard to believe it won't be my favorite soundtrack from this year.
oh,
That kind of thing.
100%. Also, a lot of the songs have really beautiful music videos that are attached to them on the Compulsion YouTube channel.
Mm, okay,
I don't remember if it's
cool.
Compulsion or Xbox Studios, but one of them has really beautiful ones. And I think the song that actually made me cry was the section, the pleasure boat section,
Mm,
and Honey, and the song that plays there, and that music video that accompanies it is it's breathtaking.
very good. Something to check out for sure. All right, well, let's listen to a bit of that music. Let's get in the mood for the upcoming section where we'll talk about what it's like to play South of Midnight.
Monsters up, what's long forgotten, twisted things, and lonesome dreams. Blood stirs up, what's long forgotten, churned up for all to see.
All right, the first thing about gameplay I think I would like to introduce with, before we talk about combat, is like what kind of game this is. It is a linear game with little offshoots. You can go look for treasure, but it's a linear game full of platforming and climbing, and then designated sections where it's combat time. So it's like climbing time, platforming time, combat arena time. It reminded me of the structure of Uncharted. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I most often heard from like my friends in my Discord server and stuff like that is how much people just enjoyed a quote, a return to this kind of game. Like,
Yeah.
I think that the pendulum has swung back. We're on the backswing from wanting everything to be the biggest open world possible. And
Yes.
especially for Compulsion's not the biggest studio. For something like this, I think that this is a great structure to kind of return to. We shouldn't be afraid of linear games. And you talked earlier about free time, and I agree with you. I play a lot of games for this show, and I can't play a 60-hour game every week. I love having a game that's just kind of structured like this, where you have your linear walk through the game, basically.
Yeah, I think that there are elements that can feel too repetitive, but I think that when it does that, it always tends to pull you, to grip you in some way. Like it knows that it may lose you in the repetition, so it introduces some new mechanic or it pulls something else in. But
Mm,
I hadn't thought about that until you said that. But I because I play MMOs, I play a lot of PoE too. I play a lot of games that don't end.
yeah.
And it is very refreshing to have a game that I have played through twice, but I was able to do that and accommodate and know that there was going to be that finite ending. And I
Hmm.
think that it's almost like with film and TV is also went through that same thing where like we need to leave everything open and we need to tell another story and we need to do a sequel and we need to do
Yeah.
this. So less open world problem, but like you can't really do an open world in a television show. But I think that it's almost in the same vein as like it takes a level of confidence because of the current landscape to just be like, this is my story. It will end. That is okay. And
Yeah.
I think that that's what this game does in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in like the greater industry landscape of like we need to turn every game into an endless money making machine type of thing. I think
Mhm.
that this game, like being with Microsoft and on Game Pass, probably gave them a bit more confidence to just have like a story we're going to tell and stuff like that. But I really liked it. I'm a sucker for this like Uncharted style climbing. I will eat it up in every single game that puts it in there. I don't give a shit about yellow paint. I don't care. I
Yeah.
love to climb on stuff. The scale and like the spectacle of the things you're climbing on in South of Midnight is often really impressive. Like they'll give you
Yes.
great vistas and stuff like that. There are chase sequences that we talked about before that will kind of test you on your platforming. The platforming has like a core handful of abilities: a wall run, a double jump, a dash. Your pretty standard 3D platforming abilities at this point. I thought that handled fine. Like I didn't mind. I'm not a lover of chase sequences, but I thought that these were generally, I thought they were generous enough where like I never got caught during them unless I fell. I don't know about you.
Yeah, pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So I'm a really big platform person. I love platformers and I love puzzle games.
Hmm.
So I tend to, the longer I spend with the game, the faster I try to go. Faster you go. If I can do something faster and not make mistakes, then I don't think you've built good platforming.
Mm.
This one I would make mistakes with, but it's because I think what they do is they may have the same mechanics, but they'll introduce new area traps or new elements that will shake you up.
Hmm.
Or if you try to go too fast, in my case, because I don't speed run things, but I just love platforming and I want to challenge myself. So I try to do things harder.
Hmm.
Definitely messed up more than a few times just trying to speed through things. And I think that shows that something isn't too easy or has a lot of the I think a lot of the times personally I love chase sequences, and in the way that you love climbing, I love chase sequences, but I need them to not magnetize me to everything. And I think
Mm.
that that was something that a lot of games started doing in these areas to like overcompensate, so that the platforming wouldn't make anybody's head hurt. But this one doesn't do it that much, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's a satisfying platformer, satisfying climbing if you're built like I am, and the chase sequences they're nice little capstones. There's not too many of them, so I think there's not enough of them for people to really get sick of them. I don't think.
Yeah.
Um, Other part of gameplay, major part, is the combat. So the combat is again a pretty simple tool set. You have your basic attack combo. You can dodge. And then you have a handful of abilities that are tied to cooldowns. So combat is basically you get into arena, there's a bunch of enemies, there are waves of enemies that come in, and you're just managing your cooldowns, trying to use your abilities in efficient ways. You can yank enemies to you or pull you to large enemies. You can shoot them with the weaves to kind of bind them up so they can't move. You can use your little doll friend Crouton, who there'd be some people who would get mad if I didn't mention Crouton during the show.
Yes.
You can use Crouton to like charm enemies to fight on your side for a bit. Pretty standard, action combat abilities at this point. I think this is the part of the game that gets the most criticism out there, and I agree that it is the part that deserves the most criticism out there. But with the caveat that I didn't mind like the way combat feels. Like I thought it was
Yeah.
pretty fun to fight stuff. I thought the abilities were pretty satisfying to use. My criticism is that it is way too samey. You do
Yeah.
what feels like the same fight 100 times. And
Mhm.
aside from the big boss fights, no combat feels different from any other combat.
Yeah, I have the exact same criticism. I like the combat at its core, and I think when you bump up the difficulty, it does actually come a lot. Timing becomes
Yeah.
really important, and being able to dodge becomes extremely important. I think it's fairly important regardless of the level that you're playing it on, but if you are looking for that little bit of challenge, bumping it up, you can get a little bit more out of it.
Hmm.
But what I did find, even when I was challenging myself, I was getting it was too much of the same, because once you lock it down, you're just clearing them really easy, especially once you unlock Crouton's ability and you know which one to always charm first, and you get your system going. And I
Hmm.
think that it is the game's biggest flaw, but I also don't feel like I was actually in that much combat throughout the game, regardless of having to be in at least 4 instances per area,
Mm.
sometimes a little bit more. But yeah,
Yeah.
nothing else to say. It deserves the most heckling for it, but I still think like their combat system is good. It just should not have been in the exact same frame every single time.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue, is that it is just the same thing. There, I did feel like I was doing a lot of combat, and it might just be because if everything feels the same, then it might stick
Yeah.
out more. I had a few times, this was mostly early in the game, where I would see the combat arena coming up and I go, ah, man, not again. So I did feel that sometimes.
That's
Um,
fair.
the other issue is there's not enough types of enemies in the game, I don't
Yes.
think. There's like
Mm-mm.
maybe 5, and
Yeah,
it's just not enough.
it's not.
You For the amount of combat you do, you need more stuff to mix it up. By the last couple levels, you've seen everything that's going to be in there, and so you already know what's coming. And like you said, you kind of get into that groove. Like the combat never felt like it was too hard or
Yeah,
unresponsive in the combat arenas, I'll say. But it was just like too samey. I didn't
yeah.
like the act of fighting the bosses. I thought this was where
Really?
yeah, so I like the bosses. I like the designs. I like the songs. I like the presentation. I don't even mind the puzzle aspects because the bosses are little puzzles, more so than just like dodge the attacks, hit the boss. But I thought the combat system kind of buckled when it was like,
Mm.
you can't use all your abilities now, um, stuff like
Oh.
that. I didn't like the act. I felt like I was getting hit by attacks that shouldn't have hit me. Skill issue or whatever you want to say, but this was the thing where it's like, and it's kind of a shame because the presentation of the big boss fights is so cool, but the act of playing them was not, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Didn't love it.
No, I think that's a really valid criticism, because they are so different, and there really isn't a single boss fight that is exactly the same, and you also don't fight every single boss, like quote unquote boss that you meet. Some that you think are bosses, you just don't
Right.
touch, and you just progress through the story because you killed them. That being said, I actually really liked the boss fights. I think I liked the boss fight substantially more than the other ones, but it's also, I guess for me, like, because there were those puzzle elements, I I think it's the way I approach games. Which is funny because I'm not like the biggest Souls person, but every time I play a game, I die first.
Mm.
Because I want to see where I can stand, what like how much damage does a single hit do, where do like what is the way to beat it. So when I go into play, like I don't expect to just not die initially.
Mm.
But I also understand that's a very particular way of playing that made it okay for me, that if you don't want to take the time to like die twice, or to see what the abilities are to then like clear it, that's like a very hyperfixation hurdle that I shouldn't put on everybody.
Mm.
So I understand the limitations that it puts, and I also think that it kind of but I also think it's necessary, because it doesn't make the combat, it gives the combat some variance in a larger
Yeah.
piece. I do think the Ruguru fight is probably the one that is the most thought out in terms of like arena usage,
Hmm.
um and balancing the abilities, what works, what doesn't, and then kind of like being able to work in your kit to what you're doing. And a lot of the other ones, you they do get simplified down where it is really just kind of solving a puzzle until you're done. So I can see that.
Yeah, and like, dodge attacks for 30 seconds until your opportunity to do the puzzle mechanic comes up, like that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So
Yeah.
there's not that many of them, and I do agree with you. I would rather fight a new boss in this game than do another combat arena,
Yes.
because of the variety and the
Plus arenas.
presentation and all that. Yeah. I will say, and no specifics right now, I thought the final boss fight was a huge letdown.
Oh.
Just a big it's not like it dulled the ending of the game or like the end of the story or something, but it was like a big confrontation that was nothing new, I will say. That's all I'll say right now. I thought it sucked. But
I loved
yeah.
it, and I'll save why for when we can talk about it.
Okay. And I get this. I get the story reason for why it is the way it is. But as a play experience, yeah. So that's the thing about combat. And I made a note here I wanted to bring up and get your thoughts on. And I think that, well, we'll see. I think that when I read a lot of reviews, or when we get to Game of the Year time, we'll hear a lot of the same kind of sentiment, which is like, the combat's not great. It's my least favorite part of the game, but it's not why we're here. So it doesn't really affect my opinion of the game. And I agree with it that like it doesn't affect my overall takeaway from South of Midnight. But I kind of believe on the show here that for the amount of combat that you do, we have to talk about it and kind of and criticize it. It is a major part of the game, and it's, to me, it's not something that you can just gloss over and just say like, well, it's not why we're here, so I don't care.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, and like they're in my heart, South of Midnight's a 10 because for me, it does things that games have not done before it. It's inventive when it comes to its art style. It is when it comes to its storytelling. It's something we have not seen in games as an art form. Outside of like really Norco, and even Norco isn't attempting the type of storytelling that this game is doing. And with that uniqueness, I do think it sets a bar and excels in its genre in a way that 10s do. But I gave it a 9 because of the combat. Because the combat, like, I think that they're a very similar thing. I gave Alan Wake 2 a 9.5 because it kept crashing on me. And I was like, your game is great, but I cannot overlook the fact that I could not play it for longer than an hour. And in this case, your game is a 10 in my heart, but I can't take away the fact that your combat was just underbaked a little bit.
Yeah. We talked about this on my Monster Hunter Wilds episode when we talked about the story, and people may wonder in that, like, Dave, why did you talk about the story for 30 minutes? And it's like, because you have to experience the story, in the game forces you to take in the story.
You have to do it. It has to be taken into consideration when you talk about it.
Exactly. We all know that no one's playing Monster Hunter because they expect or want a deep, engaging story. We're here to kill monsters, and in South of Midnight, we're here for the storytelling. We're here for the presentation, but the same principle applies. I've also heard out there that this has gotten a comment that I've never like responded to on the show before, so I'm going to take this chance. It got the comment because the gameplay, the combat is a little underbaked, because the other stuff, the climbing and platforming is a little simplistic. I have seen out there, I don't remember where, the question, does this need to be a video game? And I think that's a stupid fucking question. It's very reductive to the work that people do. So basically, my answer to does it need to be a video game is yes, they made it a video game. So in their mind, it needed to be a video game. Here we are. I think it's really reductive to everything else that goes into the interactive experience of playing a game. Just because the combat's not super great doesn't mean that it didn't need to be a video game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that this question is always interesting to me, because I'm a film critic as much as a game critic as well. And we kind of see that also happen reverse. Did this need to be a movie? Or did this need to be attached to this franchise? Did this like did this always
did this need to be
up.
X? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a little different than you in that I think sometimes if I can distill the entirety of your game into cut sequences and miss nothing, then I do think it's a valid question. However, if you put in the work that this team put into to make a tactile experience where
Yeah.
you are experiencing an environment and half the story is told through what you see in those houses and
Hmm.
the pieces that you're walking up to and the exploration in and of itself is a component that you cannot do in a film or a TV show. And
Exactly.
that makes it inherently a video game. It's and I think that that is one of the important things when you look at video games as an art form. I don't play specific types of game. I rarely play single player games, just to put it out there, because I like multiplayer games. I want a very tactile experience, and
Hmm.
sometimes I don't feel every game does that. But this game, like it is a world that begs you to go into it and find more and touch it and to interact with it. And that, like, this had to be a video game. Like, I actually can't see it as anything else because it's about walking around in it. It's about feeling it. And you're not going to get that from a TV show. Like this misses half of the emotion if you just distill it down into those cutscenes.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the important thing.
Yeah. I think that like South of Midnight as an idea could work as a movie or as like an animated movie, but it wouldn't
Yeah,
be
they
the
could sell
same
the IP.
thing. It wouldn't
Yeah,
be the same experience.
exactly.
So, exactly. Is
Yeah.
interesting you say like when you think if you could distill a game down to just cutscenes and lose nothing, then maybe you can ask that question. But in my head, I was like, I can't think of anything where I would agree with that. Like with that idea that you would miss nothing if you just watched the cutscenes, which is why I would rather play a game that I want to know the story about than just go watch the cutscene compilation on YouTube, because I could do
Yeah,
that, but I never do. So, all right.
exactly.
Well, a little chat about some kind of game criticism philosophies at the end of the
Also,
gameplay
that's
section.
to be honest, that's just a dumb question to ask if you're engaging with a game.
Yeah,
Like if you want me to be honest.
that's what I said. I think it's a stupid.
Yeah,
It's a stupid,
exactly.
reductive question to ask about. Like obviously they in their heart, in their artistic desire, wanted to
Made
make
a
this a
game.
video game, and they made it a video game. So here we are. It needs to be a game. So to get the experience that we got, it needs to be a game. You could make an animated South of Midnight movie, and it would be a different experience. And someone could ask, did this need to be a film, if they wanted to get into that conversation again. So we've gotten that stuff. It's time to wrap up the non-spoiler section of the episode. So, Kate, we always just give the opportunity, if you have any kind of wrap-up thoughts, no spoiler about South of Midnight, but more importantly, most of the time is like, who do you think should play this game? Who do you think it would appeal to, or who do you think should play this? Because I think that question does apply for this
Gosh.
game.
Yeah. Ooh, well, I think everybody should play it.
There we go.
No, I think that there are two camps. I think that if I come at this from a who will play this and get a really good time from it, I think that the people who really enjoy worlds and
Hmm.
aesthetic elements and appreciate beauty and appreciate the whimsical and the fantastical, and that's the type of world you're looking to go into, play this game. I think if you're a horror fan, actually play this game.
Mm,
And I actually do think because the combat isn't so over the top, I think that this is a very good gateway game, which is funny coming off of that last question. But I actually think that this game, because it brings to life Southern literature and Southern Gothic literature that is so baked into horror communities, that is so baked into different communities that may not traditionally play games. I actually do think this is a very good gateway game. And I
hmm.
think that that is an exciting thing to be, because who doesn't want to know that their game brought people into gaming?
Right.
And the fact that it's on Game Pass, I think even elevates it in that way. Um, and then I think if you think stupid things about the South, you should also play this game so you can stop thinking those stupid things because you
There we
annoy
go.
me.
Perfect.
That's the last camp.
Regarding the combat and this being a gateway game, you can turn the combat off, just like straight up turn it off. Not low difficulty. I mean, just skip all the combat. You can do that.
Yep.
So it's an option. And I know people in my Discord server have done that to get through the game in the way that they want to do it. So there's that. I agree with everything you said. And I will just add on there that if you liked that episode I did where we talked about games that showcase cultures outside of the US and Europe and Japan and, you know, the heavy hitters, the most common ones that games tend to get into, if you value that, then you will probably value this too, because while this is set in the United States, it's not New York City, and it's not Los Angeles, and it's not the Pacific Northwest, the places that we get games in a lot of the times. So this will get that same kind of like maybe teaching you about culture that's unfamiliar to you. I mean, Americans, we know about the history of slavery in the South, but that's not all this game's about. There's that folklore, that mythology, that Creole culture that we don't get fucking games about that ever. So I think that's the main thing that I want to like share as part of my recommendation.
Yeah.
I can't really think of anything else that's going to like really draw people in besides that.
Yeah.
You're not going to play this for the combat. You're not going to play it for the platforming, but it's like all that style and all of that artistic vision and storytelling all bundled together. It's a really fantastic package.
Well, and I think too, like to kind of build on that very specifically, I think that in the US, we know about slavery in the South, but I also don't think that it's been told from a perspective where it is just baked into the culture. And I say
Yeah.
that not because you can't escape it. I say it because it doesn't always manifest as some preachy lesson about like we shouldn't have done this as a country. It actually
Right.
shows the ripples that it causes. Not always like how do I say this? The ripples that it causes in the daily life, and it shapes the stories that you tell. It shapes the
Mhm.
perspective that you tell, and it highlights different elements of a culture differently. And I think that that's probably like one of the most important things I think for me to talk about it, because I think far too often when we see stories that talk about slavery in the South, it is just preaching we can never do this again, which we should never do it again. But also you have to understand the humanity that lies beneath it. And I think that when you have it not detached from the pain that it caused, but attached very specifically to the resilience of the people that survived it and flourished and created the South as it exists today, that is how you that is what we need more of. And I think that that's what this game does. And I think, like you said, it's what people need to play to see that lens of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think anyone who heard what you just said there, which was very well said, and thought, you know, that sounds like a story that I would like to have in a game. Definitely play it. And then there's all the, you know, the beautiful art, the music, all of those
it's
things are
gorgeous.
fantastic. So, easy recommendations from the both of us for sure. So a little housekeeping before spoiler time. It's time to do some plugs. And we always start with the guest. So as I said at the top of the show, Kate is editor-in-chief, one of the founders, writer, critic, podcaster, and probably a lot more for But Why Though? So please tell people about the site, the things that you make, and where they can find you.
Yeah, so butwhythough.net is an entertainment outlet. We do films, television, anime, video games, you name it, we do it. We do a lot of exclusive interviews with creatives from across the industries. It's Yeah, I think the highlights of us though is we really highlight international content. We do interviews with a lot of international developers that you may not hear from on other sites. And that means a lot to us because we are a site that really started up as a focus to empower younger writers, because I at the time I this is all I've done. I was not a freelancer beforehand and then had the ability to create this.
Mm.
I created this, or I co-founded this, and from that we were able to really build a place where people can get experience but also lend their voices to an industry that often overlooks them. And it also means when we choose things to cover. We're also looking to cover the films, the TV, the games, the stories that mean something that may not always be at the top of somebody's list, and
Mhm.
really unearth gems for people. And I mean, come on, if you want to support a woman-led site, if you want to support an editorial team that is predominantly women, which is very hard to say in games media,
Mhm.
come on over to us. We're cool. And we're like,
Yeah,
but why though not on Blue Sky? We do cool
there we go.
things.
Yeah, absolutely. I recommend people check out the site for sure. And then again, if you want to support independent media, what better place? Consider supporting over there if you can. Kate, where can people find you
Oh yeah.
specifically on Blue Sky?
Me specifically. You can find me at Oh My Mithrandir. That is a name of Gandalf. If you don't know what it is, I really like Lord of the Rings. Come talk to me about it.
Fantastic. So I will put all of those links down in the show notes. And again, I'll put the link about the mythological inspirations for South of Midnight. Trying to figure out how to phrase that. I'll put that article down in the show notes too, so people can find that as well. But there's a lot of good stuff. You bring in a lot of great collaborators, freelancers and stuff on the site too. So I appreciate that. I always love the media and journalism side of gaming is a fucking wasteland right now.
Yep.
So I from the outside, I appreciate the opportunities that you give some of our colleagues to work and write for the site. So
Thank you so
I'll
much.
put those links down there. For this show, I did my plugs at the top, but one more time, patreon.com/realdavejackson. Support a completely independent podcast. It's just me doing this. And you can join my Discord server too if you'd like to hop in, talk about South of Midnight this month or this week, anytime really. We also have a thriving, welcoming, friendly community in there, and we'd love to have you. I did all my plugs before, so I'm going to stop talking and catch my breath. We're going to take a break. When we come back, it will be full spoiler time for South of Midnight. All right, before we get to spoilers for South of Midnight, I'd like to say thank you to the wonderful patrons who help support the show. Big thank you to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zulgeek, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Fakori, Jill, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, Stefan, Drellish, Rob Smith, Rigamort, Silcanet, Ashton Ruby, Levi, John E., some new patrons, Jake Martin, Lucidity Claire, and Captain Drachma, and the many more people who support the show over on Patreon. Big thank you. It means the world to me. If you would like to support like them, you can do so once again at patreon.com/realdavejackson. And with that being said, let's get back to full spoilers for South of Midnight. Okay, we're back, and it's full spoiler time for South of Midnight. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start with the first kind of short story, the one with Benji, but we're not going to stick to a linear organization through here. So if you don't want to be spoiled on the ending, I'm just giving a blanket spoiler warning. They're all fair game at this point. Go play South of Midnight if you care about being spoiled. So here we go. So we'll start with the first short story with Rhubarb and Benji. Rhubarb is kind of living alone in this shack, and you learn something happened to his brother, Benji. And it's never quite explained outright, at least not that I caught, but they say Benji was, quote, different. I don't know what that means. It could mean any number of things. It doesn't really matter to me what it means. Did you have an idea beyond that?
Yeah, so I think it's important that they don't call it out. And I think I saw
Okay.
somebody kind of critique it in a way where I think some people have mapped onto Benji being autistic or any other or neurodivergent in some way.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that is important, I don't think that this is not in the story itself, but um this story structure for Benji and Rhubarb actually represents a lot of the ways in which we see familial storytelling happen in Southern Gothic literature, and that idea of something was a little off or something was different about a
Hmm.
person, usually somebody that you're close to, because of how long Southern literature has been around. It has been used to mean queerness. It has been used to mean neurodivergence. It has been used to mean disabilities. And I think that that's actually really important that they left it ambiguous, because it allows us to map ourselves onto Benji a little bit and build that empathetic thread with him. But it's also
Hmm.
very in line with the literature we see.
Yeah. And just kind of generally, like, if the story is not taking place like right now, I mean, literally every month, every year, we gain better ways of talking about
Yes.
whatever it is. And so it's not that out of the ordinary that someone, even when talking directly about this person, would just say they're different.
Yep.
So Benji was different again. Um, and the kind of like the event in the short story here, which was again, they're all kind of fucked up, but this was a fucked up one to start with, is Rhubarb, his brother, convinced him to go stand in a big hole in a tree, and cask of Amontillado to him in there. Boarded up the tree so he couldn't leave, and left, and he died inside of this tree. And then Benji becomes the monster that you see, monster in quotes, but like the cryptid that you see, the big tree man growing out of the side of this other even bigger tree. So that story is cool. One thing that I think is cool that I didn't know was going to happen is some of these stories, like they get brought back in. You're not finished
Yes.
with Benji just because you finished Benji's chapter. Hazel's grandma like uses the magical properties of the Benji tree for her
Yep.
own personal gain later in the story. And I was like, you kind of expect I thought it was just gonna be like an anthology of little short stories, and it's
Yeah.
not. This is a connected world that we're living in.
I think that that's like the smartest thing that South of Midnight does, is using Bunny, Hazel's grandma. When you explore her house and you open her room, and you see little pieces of the stories you have done up into that point, and not clues, but foreshadowing of stories you will do.
Hmm.
It's really expert, because it's one of this game is not subtle in a lot of ways, as we talked about with the music, but I think that subtlety allows it to kind of unfurl itself in a natural way. What I liked about the Benji tree specifically, in telling this story, the important piece of this is that the land itself felt so sorry for Benji that it took him and gave him another life as a tree.
Hmm.
Very specifically, and in we talked at the top of this a lot about Black culture in the South, but the game also clues in very tightly into Appalachia, which is this and the Hug and Molly storyline very specifically. You have Appalachian accents from the characters themselves, and then you also have Appalachian concepts, and trees holding spirits is one of those. And
Mm.
it's really cool to see it engaged with in this way specifically as a moment of saving. And then we also see, I guess, like, the Benji tree really is a good jumping off point for everything else you will see too, because this game engages with storytelling in, I don't want to say positives because these are very dark stories, but you see something human happening and you see trauma forming something. And then you have Bunny who exploits things and builds them in different ways. And you can see the perversion of the folklore that I
Hmm.
think is really fantastic.
Yeah, that was something I really liked about kind of the overarching story is how, like, you have Hazel and her abilities, and it's like she's legendary. Like, the abilities that she has, like the legend of the Weavers, and there hasn't been a Weaver for a while. And what I like about it is how Bunny, through her own traumatic past, is like pursuing like the forbidden or unnatural version of those same powers. Like, she's trying to
Mhm.
create godlike powers in a way, like
Yeah.
using darker magic. And one of the things that she uses is she knows about this power that, you know, a tree could have with the right kind of magic. And she figures, hey, it worked for Benji, maybe it can work for me too. And that becomes one of like the bigger, it is in essence a sequence of short stories, but you always have that through line of Bunny. Every couple chapters will show up, and you don't know for a while. You just kind of get the sense there's something, she's up to no good somehow. But once you
Yeah.
find out what it is, I thought that was really good. It worked for me in a really strong way toward the end. Once you realize like what she wants and why she's going about this, because she's like the primary antagonist, I think.
Yeah.
But she's not just like evil old white woman, possibly racist family background, probably racist. I think Hazel even says like she sees a
Oh
picture of
no,
her
she is.
grandpa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, she sees a picture of her grandpa and she's like, I don't think he would have liked me much. It's
Yeah.
like, ooh, okay. Yeah. So we have that, but Bunny is not a just after this for like the sake of power. She has
Yeah.
a traumatic story in her past too, and she's choosing to try to fix it by doing this kind of like unclean thing. As
Mhm.
opposed, I mean, I guess as opposed to the other people that are just kind of living with it because they don't have the means that Bunny has to
Yep.
research and all that. So I really like this through line with Bunny.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's really smart. I also think there was a lot storytelling wise. I think it's really important that Hazel is biracial as well,
Mm,
because it locks her into two perspectives of the South and two perspectives of the stories that she's engaging with that I think are really important. And I think her relationship with Bunny, you end up in a situation where you there's a lot of reality that I think this game hits on without whacking you over the head with it.
yeah,
And I think that we see that with her son Trey, and Hazel's father,
yeah,
and there's never overt racism shown in the game. It is those little things like, oh, he wouldn't have liked me much, or the fact that like Bunny just thinks that Hazel and her mom want money from her.
hmm,
The fact that they cut her off, the fact that Trey was discarded, where there are multiple reasons for. And I think that it's storytelling with an eye towards reality that I think a lot of people miss, especially in places like the South where like cultures aren't sharply divided from each other. They're
yeah.
very close. And it actually reminded me, Bunny, funnily enough, reminded me of that movie, The Skeleton Key. I don't know if you remember that movie.
I haven't seen it.
Um,
No.
so I think The Skeleton Key is probably one of the like most well-known Southern Gothic horror films. And it is this white couple in a house. And they essentially do get out, but by perverting hoodoo magic
Hmm.
to like stay living. And it's one of those situations where there is a again, I'm going to say this a lot, there's a long lineage but in Southern literature of white folks coming in to take black magic and or black power and spirituality and wield it in a way that gives them not always power, and like in Bunny's case something very special to her. And I say
Yeah.
that because it seems, and this is the one thing that I was not able to put together, and I don't think I was supposed to, but it seems like she's a weaver through her mother's side, not a weaver through Bunny, because Bunny doesn't have natural access to being a weaver. And so he
Right.
couldn't figure out if this was a lineage thing, if like how does one
Mm.
fall into becoming a weaver? Are you plucked from the tapestry and chosen? And it never gets teased out, and I think it's better that way. But it is something that I kept thinking every time I would, like, Bunny would pop up or we would enter Bunny's house. Like, I'd be like, oh, like, is Bunny a weaver? Does she actually have weaving from like that side of her family? Like, what is
Hmm.
happening? And I think it makes it more intriguing, to not have it
Yeah.
be so cut dry and stereotypical in the way that you would expect it to be shown.
Yeah. I don't need to know how weavers are chosen
Yeah.
personally. It works for me that um that Hazel was chosen and the one before, or a weaver before. I don't know if it was like the one directly before her
Yeah.
was what's her name? Mahalia, I think.
Mahalia Jackson,
Yep.
who
Jackson.
is
There
a
we go.
very real person in real life.
Mm,
But I believe she was a gospel singer, really,
okay.
really famous gospel singer in the South.
Nice. You touched on something I wanted to loop back to, like how sometimes the game is not very subtle, but sometimes it is, and it kind of like will make a commentary on kind of like a social dynamic without making it into like the storyline. And it's the fact that Bunny, you go through all these short stories. Everybody that you do in these short stories is like, they're not all in poverty. Like Rhubarb
Yeah.
is for sure, but they're not all. None of them are well off. They're all just kind of
Yeah.
living the best they can, except for Bunny, and everyone has these unresolved traumas that are causing them great distress in their life. But Bunny's the only one who can do something about it because she is rich. And if she writes a letter to, someone at a university who's researching something she thinks can help, they'll listen to her. And that's not something that Laurent or Jolene or any of the other characters I feel like could do. So it's
Yeah.
like a game. The game is showing you this kind of like income gap or
It's
just
a class
base,
dynamic. Yeah.
class dynamic, or like a social acceptance dynamic
Yeah.
without making that like the story. It's just there and you can notice it if you notice it.
Yeah.
But it's really good the way they do that. We should say, if anyone's listening and hasn't played the game, what Bunny's trying to do. So one of the short stories is going into the history of Hazel's father, Trey, who Bunny is his mother. And Trey had a little sister named Cherie. And Cherie was Bunny's favorite. Very clearly, she was not very nice to Trey. And there's a flashback you see where Bunny yells at Trey for making Cherie dirty, like they're playing or something. And Cherie got dirty, and it was Trey's fault, apparently. And she got real mad. So then Trey tried to wash Cherie in the water and dropped her in there, and she drowned. And so she died at a very young age. She was like a toddler or something.
Yeah.
And so Bunny is driven, kind of driven crazy, trying to research how to bring Cherie back to life. And so she puts Cherie in a tree, similar to how Benji worked, to try to like keep her soul stuck there while she researched, in the hopes that someday she could bring her back. And this is what Bunny wants. And she shows up to fuck up Hazel's plans, because Hazel's plans don't always align with her plans
Yeah.
throughout the game. So that's just the brief Bunny's ongoing storyline for anyone who didn't play.
Yeah, she was very much, I'm gonna make my problem everybody else's problem. Which, and I will highlight too, I do think that two things I think that I did not think about until like right now when you mentioned it. But class dynamics in the South, and they're big everywhere, but I think that it's particularly felt because the poorest counties in the United States are all in the South. There is a level of just getting by that has been done for generations, and there is a level of neglect by both municipal, state, and federal governments for a lot of people in the South. But the reason that that's important here is because there is a lot of neglect and because there is a lot of poverty, it makes it easy for people to exploit it. So not only is Bunny rich, but Bunny also owns companies that come
Yeah.
in and buy people's houses and evict them and take
Right.
over the land and take over the places where she can go and get that power, like steal those powerful pieces from things like Benji's
Hmm.
heart, because the area where Benji is, that swampy area, has everybody has gotten been served eviction notices from that company that Bunny owns.
Yeah.
And when you put two and two together, it was so that she could come in and rip Benji's heart out to bring
Right.
her dead child back to life.
She rips a piece of Benji out, and then she cuts Molly's heart out and steals
Mm,
Molly's heart at
that's
the
right.
end.
Yes, Molly's heart. Yeah.
Because she thinks that's going to help. And it's after two directions we could go here. I want to stick with Bunny, and then we'll go back to Molly. So I really like the way that this kind of comes to a conclusion with Rue at the end, because Rue is the classic deal with the devil character, where Rue will give you whatever you want, but it's like a monkey's paw situation. Like
Yep.
it's not going to be real. It is technically what you want, and you can live it for eternity, but it's not going to be real, and you'll never come back from it, type of thing. I just a real quick note. I see this trope or storytelling device in so many RPGs. Atlas fucking loves this idea. The idea that when presented with a fantasy world that will give you everything that you want versus the real world and all the fucked up things that happen in it, which one will you choose? And that's what this character does. And you walk through the New Orleans inspired area, which is very cool to walk through. And you just see all these people who are like, they technically got what they asked for, but they're not happy with what they got, but they wanted it so badly that they maybe decided against their own best interests. And Bunny
Or
does
they
this
did
at the end of
something
the
bad
game.
to get it. Or they
Yeah.
did something bad to get it. A lot of them
Right.
have done a sin, essentially, to get put into
Right.
that place.
Exactly. And Bunny does this at the end of the game. Like, she had just pulled out Molly's heart, and maybe Hazel would have helped. Hazel, like, chose Cherie's wishes, or chose to help Cherie by letting her go to the afterlife. But she may have helped Bunny because she could have maybe mended Bunny's broken heart, or helped with her grief. But when presented with the choice at the end, Rue comes out and offers Bunny a chance to be with Cherie again. And Bunny says it's not going to be real. Like, she knows that this is not going to be what she thinks it's going to be. She still decides to go with him and give into that. And that really humanizes her at the end, after a string of really fucked up things that she does along the way, and learning more about how kind of evil she was just in general. But then at the end, that heartbreak was so strong that she couldn't resist it. And it kind of maybe sets up a sequel, but if there is no sequel, it's an unknown. Like, could Hazel go help Bunny out? Probably. But like, I think that choice to humanize her right at the end and show like the power of grief for anybody, nobody's immune to it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that what makes it really powerful too is prior to this, when you're in that level, so Rue serves Kushma, who's like this larger king of dreams type thing that feasts on like your nightmare and your pain and like any sort
Mhm.
of really intense emotion. Um they try you replay the first chapter of the game where it opens and you're
Oh yeah,
trying
in the
to pack
neighborhood.
up
Yeah.
and you're going through the same things, except you go to the doors and Pearl and Bo don't answer. And then you go back and you think you're gonna get your mom out because you've been told by Rue that by coming here he is going to save your mom, and you take it and you trust him. And then you realize that it's fake. And it's probably one of, I think, the more powerful parts of the game for me, in conjunction with Bunny, the ending very specifically, because it turns into a set and the aesthetic changes, and it changes really drastically. And you're walking through a prop version of your story. and
Yeah.
you're making the choice to not stay in it. And it actually reminds me a little bit of that part in Guardians of the Galaxy where they make you kill your mom to get out of
Mm.
the cycle. And I think that this is really important because ultimately we can see Bunny and Hazel as completely different people in completely different circumstances. But Hazel has made bad choices too. The reason that Molly's heart is cut out is because Hazel has led Bunny to this place. Because
Yeah.
she trusted Bunny, because Bunny told her she could help her get her mom back. Because Hazel is being consumed by the inability to accept the reality that her mom could be gone and her mom could stay gone.
Mm-hmm.
And the core of this story, I think, is something that I've been it's a part of a story that's been resonating with me. So in 2021 and 2022, I lost 8 members of my family, mostly to
Mm.
COVID. And it was a really rough time. But I think that through stories about grief, it helped me kind of get through it. And I think that what we see here is you see the rot that takes place when you can't let it go, and when you do let it bring out the worst parts of you, and what happens when you choose not to, when you can accept it. I think the only thing here that is a little bit different is that, like, Hazel does end up getting her mother back after she chooses to get out of the fantasy. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it lands as hard as it could. But Hazel and Bunny are 2 sides of the same coin, even though they're drastically different characters. And I think that in storytelling, that's probably one of my favorite tropes.
Mm.
Um, and to call out, since we have talked about the end, Hazel traps her here. Like, very specifically, Hazel gets to get her mother back at the end,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately because Rue has said, I'll help you, but you
Oh,
have to give Bunny this hairbrush.
right. That's right.
And I
Yeah.
think that this is important because it is rare to let your hero do a bad thing. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this is inherently bad because Bunny has hurt people, but it keeps Hazel herself in a tradition where she has chosen herself over the benefit of somebody else. Now, it is ultimately Bunny's choice because she knows what's going to happen. She knows who Rue is. She knows what this can be. And Hazel simply presents her with the opportunity. But I think that it is really powerful to to stick to Southern Gothic storytelling so much that you allow that moral ambiguity to exist,
Yeah.
especially in this day and age where everybody likes a pretty little bow on their heroes. Uh,
Mm-hmm. It's
yeah.
interesting you bring it up. I didn't think of it that way. I think I assumed that Hazel knows who Rue is and what he's capable of, but didn't was like, yeah, whatever. I'll give her the brush. Like, whatever. Okay, sure. Like a little ignorant of like the consequences of giving her the
No,
brush. Is
she
that not
talks
right?
about it. She talks about it before you give it to her. She talks about it.
She
Like,
talks about.
she verbalizes that she knows what it's going to do.
Okay, gotcha. Then
Yeah.
yeah. The way that Hazel got through that whole thing, it felt to me like, well, because she has these abilities that other people don't have, that gives her the ability to resist it in a way that other people don't. But at the end of the day, I guess like this devil's bargain type situation, it is going to come back at some point. Like maybe even Hazel cannot transcend the
Yeah.
devil's bargain. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
hmm, interesting. So it is kind of like a passing down of others hurting or doing bad things to others for what they want. And that would fit with, like you said, some of the people in Rue's kind of domain or Kushma's domain have done bad things to get what they want. And I kind of wonder, like, will this weigh on Hazel as we go forward in the story?
Yeah.
Because like, if you just look at it, you'd be like, yeah, Bunny can go.
But he
she can
deserved
go.
it. Yeah,
She deserves it, but does it make it right to doom her to an eternity of
exactly.
Rue's trick? Yeah.
Yep. And I think that that's why they make it so that Bunny verbalizes that she knows what this choice is going to do to her. And then
Yeah.
ultimately it is her choice. Because I think Hazel says something about like, but if I give it to her, it's her choice. And I think she questions it like once before Bunny goes with Rue.
Okay.
But what it means to me is just like there's this ability for rough edges. And I think that if this had been 100% smoothed out and Bunny just got a comeuppance, that doesn't live in the literary tradition that it's doing. But I had not thought about it. But this also like this is a path for us to get a second one or a DLC or something where I can get more of this world, and that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, no, this story isn't really a story at the end of the day about these people along the way getting their comeuppance. That's not what Hazel's doing throughout these short stories. So it does make sense that it's not as simple as that with Bunny at the end, because like Rhubarb, it's like you don't like send Rhubarb to prison or something like that. Rhubarb just has to live with what he's done out there. Jolene has been living her whole life with what she did, how she got her father killed by Tom.
That's one of that's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, I love it. Just like kind of you have the family dynamic that she grew up with, which was compelling to me. But this of all of these, maybe this one and Laurent's story are the two that spoke most strongly to like, we have a folklore monster that had an origin that is like, it's just like storytelling passed down through generations, and the story becomes bigger and bigger each time it's told. Yes. And that's how you get a giant gator named Tom, two-toed Tom, because of what happened, and like the pain of this event of Tom eating Jolene's father transformed him into this big monster. And that's a tall tale. I love that.
And it's also too, I thought that one was super interesting because I think the fact that Tom is who is morphed by this and not Jolene is really interesting, because that means Jolene is perfectly content with the fact that she fed her father to that alligator, which like, I get it.
Yeah, he was a dick.
When he
Again,
was
like
terrible.
Bunny, he had to go. Yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes you have to help it along, especially in the Southern tradition. I think that it was really fascinating. Also, a good shout out to like Jolene. And I did this in my piece. Jolene is not a mythical character, but she is because she's the Dolly Parton song, because that Jolene has red hair and green eyes, just like Jolene. And she's very Nashville, which was fantastic.
I didn't put that together, but you're right. The Jolene from the song is kind of like a cryptid. A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. She's a tall tale. Everybody wants to know who Jolene is. Dolly herself said, yes, this was true. It was based on a real thing, but she has never shared who Jolene actually was.
That would be a hell of a thing to brag about. If you were like, yeah, that was me. I'm Jolene.
Yes.
That would be,
Man, imagine being the woman that was able to steal someone from Dolly frickin' Parton. Like, one, you'd probably be hunted down. But two, that's a hell of a legacy.
Yeah, for sure. We've got two more short stories here. I don't know if you want to talk about both of them. I wanted to talk about at least Laurent's story with the Rougarou.
Of course.
This one was really, really good, both in Laurent's backstory, but this one connects to Hazel's personal life in a way that I thought was also really interesting too. And I don't know if I'm reading a little bit too far into it, but a little bit of like a domestic abuse or anger issues type of situation. I am not clear on if Laurent actually abused anybody, but this transformation, it's kind of like a werewolf type transformation into the Rougarou when he gets upset, like lines up really well with just having anger issues at the very least.
Yeah. And so for me, I don't think he did anything because they are back together, at least if the
That's right.
epilogue
Yeah.
says anything. But I do think that I really love it because there are very few other avenues to explore male trauma than I would say Southern folklore. It is what centers a lot of it. And I think that that's really important because we don't talk about those pieces, but I also think it's extremely important. Obviously not a guy, but I do have men in my life who have grown up in abusive situations. And every day they carry that with them, and with their partners they carry it with them to never be that. But it does make getting angry be this terrifying thing to them. And I think
Yeah.
I don't think you're reading into it. I think that's immediately where I went. And I immediately saw men that I know in my life who are thoughtful men who love with their whole hearts, but they also have their fathers in them and they can't detach themselves from that. And I think that that's a really powerful story to tell because he is running away from his anger and his fear that somebody will see his anger and see him
Yeah.
in that way. And I think that it's really beautiful to have the connection with Hazel's mother and her because you can tell that he's very terrified of actually losing them, of actually harming them.
Right.
And it's so good. It's
Yeah.
so sad, but it is so good. Like this one hit me really hard.
It's really well done. I mean, it ties into another one of those kind of more subtle themes that they wanted to just briefly touch on, that toxic masculine idea of teaching your sons or teaching anybody to not express their emotions, and to keep them pushed down. Now, in the story, Laurent's father may have had a better reason than some others to tell him not to show emotion. Like, I think he even says, don't let the white people see you get angry. So like, I get it. But that obviously that doesn't work for anybody to just keep bottling it all up. And then, instead of something more healthy, you get explosions. But the way that folklore works, instead of an anger outburst or something, he turns into a monster and literally harms people. And this is brought on by, they have another one of those great little recreations of a company town. Again, little things where like somebody needs money for medical care for a loved one, but they can't use company money for the medical care, and the company will not exchange it for US dollars. And so we have that thing. It's not like a thing where the story is like, this is a section about all this. It's just like you walk through how people live that in the notes you read.
Yes.
And then, the boss kills Laurent's father, and that sparks the first transformation. And then, he just lives with that fear of being triggered into another one in front of people that he cares about.
Yeah. And I think too, I think it's just as important as explaining it the first way to explain it too, because I think Laurent's only understanding of what happens when you do push back on somebody and you show that anger is that his father got killed. And I think that this is so extremely salient and something Black people, brown people, like anybody of color really deals with in situations. Because there is the stigma of keep your voice lower, and I would say most of our communities have told people that. And I think I also think that makes it a touchstone that can be felt by everybody, because while it may be particularly not about the need for a Black man to hide his anger in front of a white man, I also think that there are other ways that this manifests as well, that we all just tamper things down. And I think it's really
Hmm.
important because I also think it shows that universal issue that we all carry, I think,
Hmm.
in a really beautiful and culturally specific way.
Yeah, absolutely. This was maybe it was probably my favorite of like the storylines of the short stories. It wasn't my actually it might be my favorite boss fight too. Fuck it, Laurent's storyline's my favorite.
Yeah.
I really like this. Just how down to every detail and every kind of like branching storyline that you want to follow. I think that this is just really well done. They all are
I
basically.
wanted like a little cutscene of just them as a family at the end.
Mm,
I wanted more of it. And I think that that was really important. Um I also
yeah.
think too, like, I think Laurent's story really intersects with oh gosh, I forgot his name. The man that's in the town with hugging Molly.
Oh, okay.
It's
I don't
the
remember
one
the name either.
and he's really important. So he is an Appalachian man. Laurent actually sends you to him. And he's dealing with some of the same situations from the sawmill, and he had an abusive father. And this is where we go into Molly's story, which I think is really important to bring up as well, because I think that
Yeah.
this is one of the times where you see Appalachia come through in the game, because it's a ghost town. Nobody lives there anymore, and he's kind of the last man there. And you see this in a lot of mining towns, a lot of work towns, and they still exist today, where you have a couple of people still living or it's entirely abandoned. And he is the crux of it, outside of Molly herself, is that he was the only kid that Molly wouldn't take, and at first it seems like a badge of honor. It
Yeah.
seems like I'm the one who escaped hugging Molly.
Because
Because
she takes neglected kids. Like
yes,
she takes the bad kids, right?
yes, she takes
Yeah.
the bad kids. She, at the start of it, is very much like La Llorona in like Latino culture, where like if you misbehave, fucking Molly's gonna steal you, and La
Yeah.
Llorona's gonna steal you.
I was just gonna say, like, I think the story of a creepy old woman who lives around you, that's a universal
It
story.
is.
I we
It
had
is.
one in my small ass town I grew up in Ohio. And it was like
Yes.
a thing that people I don't think my parents did, but like definitely kids scare other kids with those
Yeah.
stories.
There's always that
So,
one house with a witch. Like,
yep. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's really good. But
Yeah.
you end up finding out that the reason Huggy Molly didn't kill him, or didn't take him, was because she killed his dad, who was an asshole.
Yeah.
And like she came in and like helped him, and but he carries the guilt of not being taken and not being
Hmm.
with his friends, because that meant that his father died. And it's one of those really interesting things where you can see that regardless of the pain that somebody has inflicted on you, if you feel connected to their death, you still carry that with you. You're not gone. And I think that that's
Right.
the beauty of the storytelling, where it really captures the complexity of emotions, and nothing is just one thing. Grief
Yeah.
isn't just one thing, it can also be anger, and anger
Right.
isn't one thing, it can also be sadness. And I think that complexity is what really comes into it, especially as we find out that Molly's just this spider lady who wants kids to be happy.
Hmm. She's
um
helping Hazel's mom with her social work.
yes, yes. And so did you go back and read the entries after you finished the game of lore?
No, I meant to, and then I forgot. I didn't.
Those
I
are
read them while I was playing, but not yet.
so those are dead children ultimately.
Mm,
And I think that this is where the game gets even darker. Where when I read back and I saw that, and it was an entry under Molly, and it was the children, and they were these ghost children, and it says it's the spirits of children that Molly saved.
mm,
And I think ultimately, given the situation with the Appalachian man, and given the situation with some of the stories that we hear from Hazel's mother, I actually do think that these it gets said that these were kids that Hazel's mother could not save. And I
yeah.
do actually think that they are children who ended up facing you know, the worst parts of their parents. And
Mm.
that was probably a really heavy sledgehammer that I didn't expect. And I was just
Hmm.
going through the lore because I was writing my review and I was like, I need to get this right. What is the name of
Right.
this? And then all of a sudden I was like, ghost children.
Yeah.
And there are layers that I don't think are always immediately there. Sorry if that was a lot.
No, that's great detail. I had only noted the connection with Trey and Bunny, but that's good detail too. I love how this connects with Bunny and Hazel's story, because early on in the Molly storyline, you learn that Hazel's father got kidnapped by Molly when he was a kid, and you're like, oh, well, he got out, so it was like just like a weird quirk in their family history, huh? And then you
Yeah.
learn about how much Bunny didn't give a shit about Trey. And if it's like, oh, well, Molly takes the neglected kids, that's how she got a hold of Trey, because Bunny didn't care about him and she was too busy working on her black magic or whatever
Yeah.
to care about her surviving child. And like you said, there's the evil side of that too, but there is also the side where grief and all of those things are more complex than just like
Mhm.
single things that we can easily say, yeah, this one thing, this is why people act the way that they do.
Yeah. And I think too, like now that we're talking about it, and like this is the first time that I've talked about this game, there's so much grief and guilt. Like that is just
Yeah.
like the foundation of this. Cause I think like one of the other monsters that I really like outside of Hug and Molly is similar. It's the Ultima Haha. The the it's named after the river.
Uh-huh.
Ultima Haha. She's like this siren swamp creature.
Okay.
And it's a swamp creature in lore. It's a sea cryptid. For Georgia, I believe. I think it's Georgia. Because Alabama people are gonna be mad. Only Alabama people, but I'm pretty sure it's Georgia. And in this is the pleasure boat section of the game that I think also
Yeah.
hits incredibly hard. Um
Mm.
and this was I think it you're dealing with two creatures at this point. You're dealing with Honey, who's based on the Honey Island swamp monster, and the big sea creature. And I started piecing together that they were connected pretty early. I think it was the one that I was like, oh yeah, I got this. But
Hmm.
the beauty and sadness in this story is how they got separated. And so this section of the game is primarily just platforming, and there's really no boss battle here. You're just connecting two creatures that have inhabited the same swamp but have been separated and no longer look the same, so they cannot find each other again. And
Hmm.
the story behind it is that it was an enslaved woman who, in an effort to survive and escape, she threw her child into the river and jumped into.
Yeah.
And the goal was to both escape to the shore of the swamp. But in the process, she loses her child, and all she finds is its blanket. And that child ends up becoming Honey. Such an adorable creature. Like the creature design is phenomenal.
Yeah. Hmm.
And she's this big sea creature, and the entirety of the story is unifying them, but also understanding how serious circumstances are to make you do that,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
also
Yeah.
the pain of losing your kid in a very different way than Bunny is experiencing, which I'm happy, not happy because it was a sad story, but I'm happy that we saw the other side of that.
Hmm.
How for the Ultima Haha, which is such, it's so weird to say. Ultima for the mom in the story.
Hmm.
She internalized that and became a monster herself and refused to leave the area where she lost her child. And
Yeah.
she's not really hurting anybody but her. Well, she did mess up that boat, but they kind of deserved it. So,
Again, they had to go. They
they
had it
had to
coming.
go, all gone. But I think that it's a really beautiful story, and I think that that's really where South of Midnight thrives, is in these connections and what they mean, and the
Yeah.
ways in which they can keep us alive and keep us grounded, and also morph into something that makes us our worst selves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And doing so, I think you've talked about it a couple times, and this is a great time to just kind of like put a bow on all of these separate discussions in the spoiler section here of how dark and depressing basically all of these stories are. Each one just tells a different, most depressing story you've heard recently, but it's all done in like this could have been a horror game. They could have just taken it all the way there in most of these stories. But instead they tell it in this like fantastical way that like it's on you to kind of think through how dark and deep it goes in a lot of the ways. And like this example that you talked about, like it's not that you have this monster that's like killing people out in the swamp, or I think that it like pops up sometimes and it looks kind of scary, but
Yeah.
like it's not this, I don't know, it's not a
It's
horror
not Two
monster.
Toed
That's what
Tom.
I'm saying.
Like Two Toed
Yeah,
Tom
it's
is out there eating people.
exactly. Yeah.
They are not.
So like it's just told in a kind of warmer version than it could have been, but that doesn't make these stories any less dark. It doesn't make any of the pain hit any less, I don't think. Like
Yeah.
I'm not here saying that this story would be better if it was a
Yeah.
horror game and it was like, or if they chose to tell the stories, because I think they could have told them in even like sadder way, but they didn't really have to, because the stories kind of speak for themselves. All of these at the very core are super relatable. Maybe not like personally relatable, but like you can empathize, right? You can empathize with the mother who lost her child in the swamp. Like that's not hard to empathize with. And I think that's kind of the key thing to kind of bring it back, something I said 2 hours ago, where you go through with all these cryptids and monsters from folklore and other superstitions and all of that. But at the core of all these stories and at the through line throughout South of Midnight is all like very, very close human storylines that are not fantastical at all. Like there's extreme truth to all of these stories, just the presentation of them in tall tales and things like that. So I love how this game approached all of these storylines. Never got through any of them and was like, not sure about that. It was always like, that was really well done in their own unique ways.
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect way to put it.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that was a lot of talking. Is there anything else you wanted to mention in the spoiler section about the game?
I think we've gone through, I think we've gone through pretty much everything. Outside of just to our point at the top of the show, or earlier in the show, somewhere in the middle here, I want maximalism in all of my game houses that I walk into, because Rue's little carriage thing that you walk into,
oh yeah,
is beautiful.
The little storeroom, all the knickknacks, all that stuff.
Yes, all the icons of these lives that people have lived, and like the pain attached to them that he's like living off of. It's so well done. And the little stories behind all of them, which again, I don't think you can make a movie out of this specific part. You have to go through and touch them and like experience them. It's so well done. And I also think I'm realizing that I am a complete sucker for do this same thing over and over again to like make you feel weird, and then we'll pull you out of it. Cause to really hammer home that Rue is the devil at the crossroads, you enter into a crossroads and you can go any direction, but you're on a loop. And then eventually little pieces of the environment start changing. And then you can enter the carriage. The carriage appears, and you can enter the carriage. And it's a really cool sequence that I am now realizing is, I'm a fan of that. I really like it.
It's good. I'm glad we shouted out at least that little storeroom in the carriage for Rue. It's good. More maximalism in video game stories. More maximalism in spaces. Don't let the gamers tell you that your houses are too cluttered. in your games. It's probably going to work. So, Kate, thank you so much for doing, we said 2 hours, we're at almost 2.5, but if there's a better South of Midnight podcast out there, show it to me. So thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you so much for having me on. Seriously, you calling out some stuff has really like made me recontextualize some things that I had played through. So this is a really fantastic conversation, and I hope people listening pick up the game.
Yeah. If they're here at the end of the episode, I hope, I don't think that this isn't a game where it's like knowing what happens at the end will really spoil the experience of going through these things and taking in the music and the sights and all of that stuff. So I hope people pick it up too. And I appreciate your expertise on some of these stories with more detail and some of the folklore and things like that. It's been really good to have that perspective. So thank you again. And let's see. Yeah. So at the end, I'll give the call one more time for everyone to check out butwhythough.net for all kinds of media criticism. There's a podcast. There's a lot of good stuff on the site. So please check it out. And links are down in the show notes as always, so you can easily find them. If you're curious about some of these things in South of Midnight, again, Kate's article kind of listing inspirations from folklore is in there. Please check that out. And as always, if you're here at the end, you're my hero. Tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
Do you have a gaming subscription service like Xbox Game Pass or a crazy backlog and don't know what to play next? Well, 1H1D might be for you. Join me, Chris, and my college buddy Tom as we play a random game or a requested game for an hour and decide if it's worth playing past that hour. We go over the good, the bad, and maybe some little tidbits about the development you might not have known. Got 30 minutes? Give us a try, and if you like it, throw us a 5-star review. Try something new. You never know what might be your next favorite game.